Hello, 40 Waters. Longtime listeners of the show will know that I'm a big believer in education, especially music education, and I'm excited to announce that this episode is brought to you by TrueFire. I've partnered with TrueFire to bring you an opportunity to get into their lessons at an affordable rate in a way that's going to help you, help the podcast, and get you playing more guitar. I'm excited to say that you can use the code 40WATT, 40WATT, at checkout to get 40% off your first or next purchase through TrueFire. That includes their all access pass to have access to all of their lessons and videos and jams. I highly recommend it. I use it myself. I'm a huge fan. I truly believe in TrueFire's motto of live, practice, and play. Please use the link below to get started, and happy learning. This episode is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. There's a wonderful crew of people over on Patreon giving money every month to make sure that this show and this podcast happen and cut my overhead costs so that I can keep doing it. I can't express my thanks enough for their support and their belief in what we're doing over here. And if you'd like to join them and help support this podcast, you can do so by going over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast. For as little as $3 a month, you can support this show. And actually, now that we are starting to get sponsors for the episode, my $3 supporters will get the episodes ad-free. If you want to support at a $5 level, you'll get ad-free episodes and you will get additional content every week. I thank all of you that have given money to help keep this going, and I thank all of you that are going to become supporters and help make sure this show keeps happening. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Another episode, 40 Watt Podcast. Super excited to get started. I think I say that every week. I think I say super excited. I'm just an excitable person. Y'all know that guy who always puts like not multiple exclamation marks, but there's an exclamation mark at the end of every sentence in an email or a text message. That's me. I'm that guy. I've realized that. I'm trying to learn to embrace the period instead of the exclamation mark. But anyway, I am super excited because I'm an excitable person to be back with y'all. Hopefully, y'all are doing well. Everybody's nice and healthy and playing gigs or, doing whatever it is you do and enjoying life. You've already heard at the top of the show, if you are interested in helping making this podcast happen, you can join our Patreon, where as little as $3 a month, you can get this podcast without the ads. I know ads are annoying. I totally get it. I skip past ads in podcasts too. But you know what? They help pay bills around here. So if you want the episode with no ads, you can go over to Patreon, $3 a month. You'll get this episode, 0 ads. If you go for $5 a month, you'll get this episode plus extra content every episode with my guest. Sometimes it's not with my guest. Sometimes it was some random person I pulled in because maybe my guest had limited time and they couldn't do a Patreon episode as well. So I just pull somebody else and we do something totally different. You never know. It's a lot of fun. There's a big backlog that's starting to develop of Patreon episodes. So you get access to all of those and you get to help make this show happen. And I really appreciate it. And I'll read your name at the end of episodes, which is really fun. Or if you don't want your name read at the end of episode, put that in the note when you become a Patreon and I'll leave you out. Anyway, I digress. Gonna move on now. So this week, for you guitar players, sorry, we're not talking, well, we might not be talking guitar gear. We might, who knows? We'll go all over the place. I've got Tyler from Alder Audio. How are you, Tyler?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here.
Yeah, dude, I'm glad. We've been chatting in email trying to line this up for a little while now, and it hasn't helped that this year has been the busiest professional year of my life in my day job. And so there was a point where just I had to just all the juggling with the podcast, I had to go, I don't have time for this. So then I went radio silent for a hot minute.
Well, this is a substantial podcast to run with a full-time job, so respect there.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it because it's not, this isn't how I make my living. I just do this because I like talking to people and getting to hear about stories and gear and the music and things that are going on. And who knows, sometimes we talk about guitar, sometimes we don't. Usually we do, but I feel more and more, especially with return guests, who knows what we're going to talk about at any given moment.
Sure.
But on that note, so you are coming to us. This is a slightly different. You're actually the second microphone company that's been on the show. I'm super excited because I get geeked about microphones. I can't afford to be a microphone guy, but I get geeked about microphones, and they get expensive fast. We talked about that on a past episode. So you have Alder Audio. So let's give everyone a frame of reference. Who are you? How'd you get into doing what you're doing? What's your story?
Sure, yeah. So, well, Alder, for one, is just a super tiny mic company. I'm the only full time person, and I make one model of ribbon mic in two versions. And so it's a very streamlined company, and it's pretty new.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this about a year and a half, and
Oh wow,
yeah, no, it's quite new. And
it's real new.
so I'm a chemist by training. But I've always been a guitar player, home studio guy, singer, all that kind of stuff. And my dad also, like, I grew up with him running a small business, and so it was like a manufacturing deal. So I was like, riveting things together in high school and stuff like that. And so I got this hodgepodge background of music and recording and industry and small business, and I'm a big tinkerer. So I've done tons of tinkery projects, and there was one day where I was like, I'm gonna try to build a ribbon mic, and I got the bug for it. And um, any project I do, I'm kind of a project person where, like, I don't start at like entry level, like if I'm
Oh
gonna do a
yeah,
project, I go straight to like hard mode. So my first ribbon mic, I was like, no, I'm not gonna do a kit. I'm not gonna do a common design. Like, I'm gonna design an entirely new ribbon microphone from scratch as my first ribbon microphone, and that's just the way I am. And
yeah. I
but
get
it
it.
it actually like worked out shockingly well. It like I made it, and it was like, wow, this has some interesting potential to it. And then I spent about a year still working chemistry and developing this idea. Didn't really plan on starting a business, but they were just getting better and better and better. And there were just a lot of different reasons where it's like, I'm gonna take a jump here and try to create this. And so I quit the job, launched the company. In the process, I got a patent on the ribbon mic, so it's like a totally
Oh,
original
dig it.
design, has some cool patented features inside of it.
Uh huh.
And I decided to launch the whole company on like a direct sale model. So if you hear about ribbon microphones, you always hear super pricey and fragile. Is
Right.
what comes to mind. But people love them on a lot of stuff, especially guitar cabs and drum overheads and stuff like that. But my goal
Yeah.
from the start is I could have gone for the high end of the market, but I was like, those aren't my people, like I had a drummer I was working with, and he was like, make it in our price range, us folks. And
Right.
that's what gets me going. So I kind of designed the whole thing from the ground up of like, how can I take an entirely US made, really great ribbon microphone and bring it down into like a home studio budget. And so for reference, like the one everybody knows, you got the Royer, R121 is
Right.
I don't know what they're going for now, 1400 or something like that.
Yeah, they've crept up there over the last couple years.
Yeah. And so I launched, and I have stayed so far at $400.
That's intense for a ribbon microphone.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of them out there, and it's detailed on why there's a span, and it's hard to make a good one for cheap. But a big thing is the direct thing. Is like, I decided I want to do this like small volume, and so I'm a lot like a lot of the other makers you have on the podcast. Like, I listen to the podcast, and you've got
Yeah.
these guitar builders that are like one man shops and stuff like that, and so I'm a lot like that with ribbon microphones. Yeah.
Yeah. I think something like a ribbon microphone. Um, it's like I can't remember. I was having a conversation. I can't remember if it was on this podcast or if it was with just some friend just talking about it, talking about the concept. They were talking about guitars, but they were talking about the fact that at some point they had this epiphany moment where they were like, "Oh, if there's a guitar, someone had to build it. They don't just appear. Like there's not a robot just stamping out guitars somewhere. That someone had to build it." And I think microphones kind of fall into that category for a lot of people in the music industry. That like,
Sure.
oh, there's someone building these microphones.
You just don't think
Whether
about
it's
it.
a yeah, whether it's a big process like a big assembly line, I'm sure at Shure, or some
Mm-hmm.
AKG or some of the other bigger companies where I'm sure there's like a massive team and assembly line, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not I'm not deriding that at all. Um, but a lot of these smaller companies like you with Alder Audio, there's somebody in there assembling each of these each of these
Mm-hmm.
microphones. Um,
And
so
especially that's true
it's
with ribbons, because ribbons are like a
yeah,
very physical thing. Like other mics might be a lot very circuitry dependent, and
yeah.
I compare building a good ribbon microphone to like building a good acoustic guitar. It's about geometry and material selection and all that stuff. So
Yeah, it's a microphone I've actually not had a ton of experience with, even in my audio engineering program in college. It was just a microphone we didn't, you know,
mm-hmm.
you give a bunch of college students a microphone and then tell them, hey, don't put phantom power on this.
Yep.
What's going to happen? I
Yep.
mean, you already know where this is going. So there just weren't a whole bunch of them available. And so they've always been sort of a mystery to me. Like,
Yeah.
I've used a handful of them over the years. I've never owned one.
Yep.
I've never like consistently used one, even in my audio engineering gigs. It was always, to be honest, for live sound, it was always dynamic cardioid or supercardioid or hypercardioid,
Mm-hmm.
and small diaphragm condensers. That's where most of my work has been, because most of my experience is live audio. Um, not a lot of large diaphragm condensers on live stages unless you're doing bluegrass, and that's a whole other thing.
Sure.
But
Yeah. But
yeah.
I
So
think that
ribbon microphones are this big mystical thing.
a lot of people see them that way. I mean, and they were kind of that way to me, because if you're into recording at all, everybody's like, well, get a dynamic and get a condenser, and then you've got at least got your bases covered. And the ribbon is
Right.
always this kind of like, oh yeah, there's also this other category over here, and they're kind of specialized and whatnot. And I was always told that ribbons are dark and colored, that they're not very natural sounding. And
Yeah.
what I learned over time, because I got curious about it, my first entry was I got like a cheap Chinese one. So it was like an MXL ribbon mic. It was like
Oh yeah.
$100, and they have really bad transformers, and their ribbons are bent a lot of times and stuff. But it does get you the quote warmth of the ribbon sound. Like you get that, but it is quite dark and colored. And I mean, you basically could only use it in very specific circumstances. And one of my
Right.
mysteries was like, okay, like, well, if the ribbon is so colored and off and dark, like, why are ribbons super super popular in like pro recording studios? I
Why are they always referenced?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
everyone talks about
yeah, like the
the
121 is like it won a Grammy,
yeah.
you know?
Right. That and it's the 121 and 57. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a guy, I think it's just a guy, I don't think it's like a company, maybe it is a company, that literally makes a mount that puts a
Yep.
121 and a 57 in the exact position for so that you can get, proper recording and the 3-1 ratio, all that kind of stuff. Like, they make a mount. That microphone is so ingrained. If it's so dark and so colored and it's so problematic, why are they so revered?
Yeah, they're loved. And what I found out is
Yeah.
that there's a big delineation between crappy ribbon mics and proper ribbon mics. And so the first good ribbon mic that I ever tried was one I built. Like I didn't have the
Oh
money
wow.
to go buy a expensive one. And
No.
but a really big piece is the transformer that's in there. Like that's a huge part of the design. And just various things that you could do with the design. It's really hard to make a good one that's cheap. And so I think that that's why ribbons get this funky reputation. Like there's these kind of crown jewel ribbon mics that are really popular in Nashville, and then there's these like comments about dark colored weird mics, and it's been a learning thing for me to make them and learn where they
Yeah.
fit. But I wanted to make a good one and make it reachable. So
To put it into more guitar player terms, it's sort of like the way um for big I'm not a super delay like freak as far as like sounds in guitar until I discovered tape delay. And once I discovered tape delay, I went way down the rabbit hole. In fact, I've got some YouTube videos that we're recording this in late October. Whenever y'all see this, the videos may already be out. Working on some videos really delving into the whole tape delay thing.
okay,
Um, and it was like you'd buy a pedal and it's like, oh, it mimics a tape delay. It does the same thing. It's like, oh, it's warbly and it's dark. Then you
Mm,
play a real tape delay with good tape in it, and you're like, this isn't really that dark.
yeah.
This is actually pretty bright.
Yep.
Why do all these pedals sound dark? And so it's like, even with a ribbon microphone, maybe it is with, naturally darker, they may not necessarily have to be.
Yeah, and in
Is
ribbons,
that a case? Can they be
oh,
brighter?
definitely. Yeah, yeah. So, and mine specifically is pretty bright for a ribbon mic. I mean, it's not a bright mic, but
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
neutral. The weird thing about mine is that the primary design sounds different from the front versus the back, and the front is designed for vocals, and so it's I mean,
Okay.
it's a great singing mic, and then the back is great for like guitar cabs and stuff. But I think that ribbons get the reputation that they kind of all sound in one category, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like saying, oh yeah, that's a single coil guitar. It's like it's this massive, there's a huge amount of design variation that you can have inside of how to build a ribbon mic, and they can sound vastly different from each other. But people are
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's a ribbon mic." And they don't realize that there are quite dark ones, like a Coles, if you've ever heard that name. The Coles is a pretty
Yeah.
dark colored mic, all the way up
Yeah.
to, there's a guy out here in Detroit, Masanovic, that makes like a very bright ribbon mic specifically designed to be kind of a little crispy even. And so,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah, Coles seem like, and I'm purely going on YouTube videos because that's what we do. We talk in terms of YouTube at this point. They seem to be like the soup du jour lately. Like, everybody's got
Okay.
a Coles, and so I've seen that a lot. Andrew Masters has them on his channel a lot, and
Yeah.
I think I just saw where Rhett Scholl posted a video. He's with Mary Spender, and Mary's actually singing into a Coles. I'm pretty sure it was a
Oh,
Coles.
wow.
Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, if I'm wrong, someone please correct me gently. Um, I didn't see the brand name, but the design is very unique for Kohl's. Like, they have a very distinctive
Yeah.
look.
Yeah. And
So I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
I've never used a Coles, but I know them quite well because, like I said, I came from a scientific background, right? Chemistry nerd
Right.
guy. Went deep when I designed ribbons. I went deep into the science stuff. I was listening to physics lectures on like how the sound deflects around stuff, and I read old patents and that
Oh,
kind of stuff.
really?
And the beautiful thing about the Coles is that it was actually that design was developed by the BBC, and the BBC has these technical bulletins that they've now made public record. And so you can go
Really?
back and read like the technical report from the engineer who was working on designing the Coles microphone, what is now the Coles microphone, in like
That's pretty cool.
1954, on like what they were discovering and what they were measuring and why they made the design, choices they did. And so I read a bunch of those technical bulletins while designing this microphone.
Yeah, that's delving in pretty deep. A lot of people, like, for example, like a lot of pedal builders. I'm not throwing shade on you pedal builders out there who listen to this. But a lot of them just jump in and build a fuzz. They don't understand why the components do what they do. They just know that, oh, well, you put these like this and they make the fuzz sound.
Yeah.
Like,
And
they
that's a
just
good
do
time.
this.
Yeah. It's like
Oh yeah, no,
fun to
it's
put
it's
together.
definitely a party, but yeah, it's there's a difference in getting drunk and then understanding the science of uh alcohol as it enters the bloodstream and how it affects the brain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
There's a big difference there. So something we ought to mention. And again, I don't have super experience with ribbon microphones, but you referenced it, the two sides of the microphone. By design, ribbon microphones are always figure eight, or can they not be?
It's possible to make them not figure eight. There's just a few of them out there that aren't, but
Okay.
by their nature, they're naturally figure eight. So you've got to kind of design around. You got to do some funky design things to make them not figure eight. So the vast majority are figure eight, and there are a few out there that sound different from the front and the back. Royer actually sounds different from the front and the back, but
Interesting.
they do it different ways. So what Royer did is they took the ribbon and they moved it like to the front of the magnets. So it's a strip of super thin aluminum foil between two magnets. That's
Right.
kind of your element. And like they kind of shifted that ribbon forward for SPL handling, because they were like, because the ribbon gets blown back past the
Right.
magnets, and so they're like, well, we can crank it, louder if we move this forward. And then they found out, oh, now it sounds different from the front versus the back. and then they got a patent on that, and it's been a long time. But so it's known to do that whole thing. But what I did in
Hmm.
mine is quite different. So I have a whole like geometry inside that's unique and part of the patent that makes the front sound different from the back in a little different way. That's why the front is good for vocals.
Yeah. So, and that's what makes them so different, and that's where the reference to the fragility of ribbon microphones comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it is literally a piece of aluminum suspended.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's so one of the things that has become a peeve of mine, because it was so impressed on me in school, is people who blow on microphones to see if they're
Oh
working.
yeah, yeah, that's killer
Like,
for a
don't do that,
ribbon.
please.
Yeah,
Please do not. Yeah, you can literally destroy a ribbon microphone by blowing on the microphone.
yeah.
um most ribbons, yeah, supposedly there's some that are more durable than others. There's even a couple now that can take phantom power and not completely disintegrate. um
Yeah,
I've seen those. i
yeah.
i don't know how that works.
Yeah, the
i
phantom
i
power,
assume
honestly.
yours don't like phantom power.
No, so you can. I got a video on my YouTube channel where I actually drop the mic, and then I turn phantom power on and off. I blast it on the mic, and then I talk into it, and it still works. And so I did a lot of work on the durability of my mic. Phantom power is actually these days less of a concern.
Hmm.
So for the
Oh,
most part,
really?
you're not going to
That's
blow a
good.
ribbon with phantom power these days, unless the one. This is a little technical, but the one place you're going to do it is if you got a patch bay and you plug in a 1/4 inch, because you can briefly like short the phantom power, which you don't want to ever do anyway with any mic. If you do that, you'll
Yeah,
blow the ribbon. But otherwise,
gotcha.
phantom power on most modern ribbon mics is okay, but you don't need it. But and then the
Yeah,
durability wise, the that's probably the biggest part of my patent. So I all ribbons are corrugated because they need to be stretchy. You know, you can't just put flat
right.
aluminum foil in there. And
Right, it
the
wouldn't really move.
Yeah, exactly. And it needs that stretchiness, and so you run it through like a pair of gears to make a corrugation in it. And I happen to be like deep into 3D printing, so I do all that modeling and printing and stuff like that, and build prototypes. And in 3D printing, there's this really common thing called herringbone gears. It's a set of gears that are like the teeth are like angled to each other. Like all you got to do is
Oh,
Google it
yeah.
and you'll see it immediately. It's called herringbone gears. And I was like, these are really interesting. I wonder if I can corrugate a ribbon element with these. And so I corrugated a ribbon, and now it has a double bend in it. Like it looks like a set of V's going up the ribbon instead of like lines. And a
Yeah.
double bend, it's kind of like if you imagine a piece of paper that was bent and folded in two axes at the same time. Like it adds a lot of strength. And so it's still a thin aluminum foil, but it is a little more
Right.
durable than your average ribbon, and that's been a fun thing to get to do.
That's pretty. It's one of those things that I need to wrap my mind around. I need to actually see it. I'm going to look it up after we're
Sure.
off of this, because it's one of those things. I'm just that person. I need to see it. It's like in my
Oh,
mind is
all
like
kinds of
my
people
mind
are.
is saying one thing,
Yeah.
but it's the concept of ribbons. And it's funny because I'll reference, because I had them on. Listeners will know I had Lewitt Audio on, Dan from Lewitt Audio. They don't make a ribbon microphone. That's the one thing they don't make
Mm-hmm.
right now, and the one thing you do make. So
Yep.
it's really interesting. I think this is very complimentary microphone companies I've had on at this point. But um, there was a point where like ribbons like became the rage in the speaker world, and maybe they still are. I don't
For
know.
for
When I first started
tweeters.
running live audio, yeah, line array systems were becoming the rage. And
Mm-hmm.
we had PV put their line array system in the club I was working at, and the number of ribbons we blew in those speakers in the first few months, as all of us were learning how to use
Okay.
it.
Okay. So
Yeah,
are
it
you talking about
go ahead. I'm sorry.
a ribbon that goes in the speaker and is used as a tweeter? Because that's a
Yeah,
thing. Okay, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
those, yeah, I totally get what you're talking about.
yeah. So those were I don't know. It's an interesting technology that I wish I'd had more time to work around. For listeners, if you ever taken a microphone apart, like me, I like to destroy things because I don't know how to put them back together. Um, it's just destroying things. You know, the way I always describe a microphone to people is I pretty much just tell them think of a speaker and just reverse what a speaker's doing. Instead of putting
Mm-hmm.
sound out, it's
Yep.
taking the pressure in and
Yep.
translating it into electrical signal. Then there's some things with crystals and magnets and stuff that I don't really understand. I'm not going to try to understand. I just need it to work. Ribbons. So there's the suspended ribbon.
Yep.
The pressure, or the sound is hitting it
Mm-hmm.
and causes it to flex, and that's where the signal is coming from. Do you find in the reinforcing of the ribbon that it becomes less sensitive?
Everybody always asks that question, and
Yeah, I have to know. I
yeah.
have to know this.
Well, so what's funny is that when you're a maker and you have a new idea, like you have that positivity bias where you're always like, it's gonna be the greatest thing ever, So I'm like, I'm gonna
Yes.
corrugate this ribbon, and it's gonna sound so much better because it doesn't have like a resonant frequency that's the same or something. And I thought I was gonna get this big sound benefit, and then I did it, and I
Right.
plugged it in, and it sounded absolutely the same as the other corrugation. And just zero difference at all. And since then, now I got a whole QC set up with I frequency sweep every single mic that goes out the door to make sure that it it adheres to the standard. And I've done that back and forth with the herringbone corrugation and the standard corrugation. Zero difference between them in the frequency sweep, which is a big shocker to me. You'd think it would be different, but it's not.
Yeah, I definitely thought it would be different.
Yeah.
I definitely thought you'd hear an audible difference. But obviously the one thing it does, it increases the SPL that it can handle.
It
assuming.
is more rigid. So SPL handling, the thing is, ribbons like mine generally can handle high SPL. I don't know how to test for it. I'll be honest, because you talk about the SPLs that you actually have to test for. It's like 135 decibels. Like, yeah.
You don't keep a jackhammer in your studio?
Gotta blow the windows out of my studio, how do you, and so that's really specialized testing. I don't even know how they do that, if they do it for real or they simulate it. But I'm like, okay, the real answer is,
or they just guess.
Yeah,
I'm guessing
I know
you can handle.
who's regulating the mic specs. But I'm just like, okay, the SPL handling is really stinking loud. That's what it is, because it's louder than you're gonna need it to be.
Yeah, exactly. Can it handle a snare drum and a guitar amp?
Mm-hmm,
Not that you'd put a ribbon on a snare. I guess somebody has at some point or another.
I've heard people do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if it can handle that and it can handle guitar amps cranked up, that's really about the loudest you're going to need one. I can't think of something in the average. I'm going to get emails. I recorded a jet engine down at the airport and I needed it to handle 215 decibels at 10 feet. I don't know. Listen, you're not normal if that's what you're doing. But in the normal home studio environment, the loudest thing anybody's recording is a snare drum or a guitar amp.
Yep.
So if it can handle those things, then you're pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk about, I'm trying to figure out, do you have time to be a guitar player anymore, or are you just building mics all the time?
Well, actually, I am way more into music now that I'm building mics, because
that's awesome.
It kind of synergizes with my work now, because so I was a big player in high school and stuff like that, and I mean I'm definitely your podcast audience. It's I rewire my electric guitars, and I did that since high school. Actually, it's kind of a fun story. My first set of pickups that I wanted to swap was I think I was a sophomore in high school or something like that. I heard about swapping pickups, and I'm like, okay, talking to my dad, can we solder these in ourselves, and but I wasn't gonna go for any regular replacement guitar pickup. And so I scoured the internet, and I found out about Bill Lawrence pickups. Have you ever heard of Bill Lawrence? Does that name? Yeah, so it's confusing because he worked at various companies like Gibson and Fender, designing pickups.
So you'll see Bill Lawrence designed on a lot of pickups.
Yeah, what's confusing is that I think at some point somebody got a hold of his brand name, and so it was this thing where there's some pickups that are branded Bill Lawrence that aren't Bill Lawrence. But anyway, I I heard about his, and he was running an independent pickup shop that they were like, yeah, we're like your international mom and pop shop. And it was like him and his wife, and really cheap, good pickups. And I was like, these are the ones. Like, I don't want to buy your standard thing. I'm gonna buy this. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted, and so I called to ask a question, and Bill
Yeah.
answered the phone. and and so I'm talking to this like legendary pickup designer, and I'm like, 15 years old, and I can still remember the conversation in my bedroom. He's talking about like eddy currents and impedance, and I've got no idea what
Oh
he's talking
man.
about, but I'm trying to soak in like anything that I can. And the funny thing is, now I understand a lot of those things a lot better. And so it's just an interesting full circle thing. So I've always been like that, but I didn't choose like the music direction. So, I went to school for chemistry, and then I've done all
Yeah.
kinds of things. I designed batteries for a while, then I designed wire. My last job was glue. So I like formulated glues
Wow.
and things like that. Always like product design that has to do with materials, which, is ribbons are kind of product design that has to do with materials. But now that I'm doing ribbon mics, it's like, hey, well, I'm going to demo this ribbon mic. Like, I guess I gotta get a better guitar amp,
Yep.
Like I got way more excuses to do music because it's related now. And so like I picked up a drum kit, and I'm trying to learn a bit because I just want to relate to people who drum, that you record and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's been a big positive thing because I'm playing a lot more music now that I'm building ribbon mics. So
That's awesome. See, I've had a similar experience with this podcast in that I have a lot more gear now than I ever had before I started the
yeah.
podcast. When I was gigging 4 and 5 times a week, I
Hmm.
had like 2 guitars and an amp and a pedal board, and that was all of my gear. Now I gig like 4 or 5 times a year and have
Yeah.
all this gear, and it's hard to justify it. Anyway, that's a cry for help. Um, but so I was that way about gear too. I did the same thing with the pickup swapping rabbit hole. That was a whole thing. Mine was Seymour Duncan. Like first online forums I was ever part of were the Seymour Duncan user group forums, which I'm still over there
Okay.
occasionally. I
Yeah.
don't talk as much, mostly reading. And back when guitar.com had a forum, I know a lot of people were Harmony Central. I never went over to Harmony Central. That was a scary place. So I stuck it out on the guitar.com forums. In fact, I'm still friends with a lot of people from that forum to this day. It's real cool. Facebook has
Nice.
helped us stay in touch. Um, but I got really down that rabbit hole too, and you start to wonder about all the different things, and microphones were a rabbit hole that I eventually found my way into,
Hmm.
especially when I was in school
Yeah.
and starting to do all this, and I really got obsessed with uh, vintage style mics. We never
Hmm.
really. So the school that I went to for audio engineering, Delta State University, they have what's called their um, uh, Delta Music Institute, DMI. I know the acronym. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. Delta Music. I started at MTSU in their recording industry management program, and that program was so huge, so many people.
Hmm.
Like they were
Get lost.
graduating people that had like a grand total of 16 hours of studio time. I'm like,
Wow.
ooh, yeah, no, it was. Hopefully, it's different now. But like when I was there, they actually had to throttle the people going into the upper levels of into the 300 and 400 level courses.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
they would only they would only let 100 people every fall move into the upper level courses, and 50 people in the spring,
Okay.
and that was them trimming it down. Like to give you
Wow.
an idea of how many students they had. So I went back to Delta State, got to actually, like first day back in classes, I'm in a studio hanging out with Norbert Putnam. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, for those of you who don't know, Norbert Putnam was the bassist for Elvis Presley for a while. He worked in Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals. He helped start the program, but like started hearing about like U47s,
Mm-hmm.
U87s, 421s. Started hearing about all these really cool vintage dynamic and condenser mics, and I'm bringing it back to the ribbon discussion, because you said something earlier that I wanted to get back to. This is my ADHD backtracking. um, got really into those, but didn't have any ribbon mics in the studio at the time because it was
Mm.
still such a new program.
Mm-hmm.
But we learned about them, And so you mentioned earlier you're a chemistry guy,
Mm-hmm.
you're into materials. Um, Ribbon microphones are typically, piece of aluminum suspended between magnets, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other materials that ribbons can be done out of than aluminum?
There, to my knowledge, exists a single microphone that is kind of a unique one. It's definitely worth checking out. Um, they used to be by a brand called Crowley and Tripp, and then Shure bought them. And so
Okay.
Shure does have a ribbon mic. I mean, they don't really advertise it. It doesn't get around very much, but
Yeah, I didn't know they had one.
yeah, these two guys they came up with a process. And it still uses aluminum. Honestly, I've looked
Uh-huh.
at the patent. Like, it's kind of a lamination of aluminum onto like super thin PET, so like the same plastic you make plastic bottles out of. And
Yeah.
so it's got this thinner layer of plastic in it, and it's more durable. And they call it Roswellite, and they make it sound like super advanced and stuff like that.
Like Roswell, New Mexico?
Yeah, I guess
Like,
I don't. They named that. That's their magic ribbon material. But I mean, and it's
they
a
make
good
it out
idea.
of alien space material.
But it is a good idea. But that is literally the only variation on aluminum that I know about. And because otherwise, aluminum is ideal because it is electrically conductive and light. And so,
Okay.
the whole ribbon thing is that, the thinner, because the ribbon, like, these things are crazy thin. Like, don't think aluminum foil from your kitchen. Like, it turns to
Right.
dust in your hands. Like, when I install the ribbons, half the time I got to hold my breath. Like, I developed this technique where, like, if I exhale, I kind of subconsciously direct it away from the ribbon. Because if you even breathe wrong, like, it kind of puffs everything up. Like, it's
Yeah.
insanely light stuff. It's super thin. And so when metal's that thin, like, it can get fairly resistive. So if you made that out of
Yeah.
something that wasn't as conductive as aluminum, like, you'd run into a problem there. But then also, like, basically, like, it's very advantageous to make it light. And so a thicker ribbon doesn't sound as good as a thinner one. Thinner one's much harder to work with.
Yeah.
And so aluminum is kind of this material sweet spot. But I have looked into other things because, like, that gets me going. There was even like a conductive polymer thing that I was researching at one point. Maybe someday
wow.
they'll come around to that. That would be really cool. And if ever there was a thin film rubberized conductive polymer that you could put in a ribbon mic, I think I'd be the guy to do it because I have that background. But
Yeah,
anyway,
see, that's why I
that's a
thought of
rabbit
this, because
trail. Yeah.
yeah, when you mentioned you're a chemistry guy and you're a materials guy, I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely had to have at least researched this
Oh,
topic
absolutely.
as to whether or not
Yeah.
there's some other material. Not that I don't think we're in any danger of running out of aluminum anytime soon. As long as everybody keeps recycling, please recycle, y'all. But I because of that, you just confirmed like all the things I'd always been told about how small and fragile
Yep.
and like the idea of is there anything else that would work that maybe wasn't quite as fragile as we're going into the holiday season, um, that wouldn't just disintegrate. Because I've heard the horror stories, and that's probably why I've avoided ribbon. It's probably why a majority of the listeners of this podcast that have
Yep.
worked with microphones at all have avoided them.
Yep. Yeah, and ribbon makers tend to say, hey, treat it like you would treat a studio condenser microphone. Don't drop it, and
Right.
and don't put it
Please
in
don't
front
drop mics.
and don't put it in front of a kick drum. And for the most part, and use a pop filter. Mine you can use without a pop filter, and I'm not even worried about it. But yeah, I mean, once you have one, it's kind of like, no, it's okay. And some ribbons have even, you can take drops sometimes, and sometimes they bend and sometimes they don't. I'd say that their fragility, because once they're inside the microphone, because it's a suspended bouncy thing, it doesn't have a lot of weight to jam itself with. You know what I mean? And so they are really fragile. The thing that they're susceptible to is air velocity. So it's not about something being loud. It's about air moving fast by them. And so they are.
That's why the kick drum comment.
Exactly. The kick drum is kind of the big one to remember. But yeah, they're not. A lot of ribbon makers kind of say, hey, don't be quite as worried as the reputation it has. But I'd say the other thing is that, like, you just got to have somebody. You got to know what the ribbon replacement cost is. And so that was a thing that I built in too, is that, like, I'll replace my ribbons for $20. and that's like, I'm not making any
Nice.
money on that, but I'm like, it's just going to be a product support relationship with people that have my mic. They have that guarantee that like they don't, they're not scared that they're going to, bend the ribbon and then basically it's the cost of the mic to fix it, like, so that's what I've
Right.
stood on. But I have not yet had one bend, and I have not had one returned yet for that reason. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
So now that you're sort of established with making the ribbon mic, so do you have plans for other microphones, or are you just gonna? I know you've got two versions of your
Hmm.
ribbon microphone. You've got the standard, and then you've got one that I believe is an symmetrical or an asymmetrical. I'm getting this wrong.
Yeah, so the standard one is asymmetric, and that's the one that
Okay.
I sell more of those. I think it's more valuable to be versatile. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
designed to be a studio workhorse. You can use it on all sorts of things. But there are people out there who like they want their ribbon microphone to be a figure eight and it sounds the same on the both sides. Like they're using
Yeah.
it for mid side or whatever else. And for those people, I make a version of the mic that sounds the same on the both sides. So I just call that the
Yeah.
H44S for symmetrical. But so
That
it's
makes sense.
kind of one mic, two versions. As far as in the future, like I definitely have design ideas for ribbons, but it's just a balancing act of like how much time do I want to spend developing. I did have a crazy idea because I like this whole I love the online community of music people. Like I love all the
Yeah.
YouTube channels, the podcasts and all that stuff. And I would kind of like to be more participatory in it, like I would like to be more connected to all of that. And so I did have a
Yeah.
crazy idea. You can even tell me what you think about it. It might be a
Okay.
little wild and idealistic and impractical, but I just thinking about this the other day.
Oh, well, I am Captain Impractical, so let's go.
So I was literally thinking, what if I did a community developed ribbon microphone? And so I would do a YouTube series where I say I'm designing a new ribbon microphone, and I'd say here are three design choices, and I'd have three prototypes, and let's say they're three different lengths of ribbons, three different widths of ribbons,
Yeah.
or thicknesses, or three different transformers, or whatever, and I'd do demos of those three things, and then get feedback from people on what they thought, and do a video series where over time I developed the next ribbon microphone like in concert with feedback, and like brought people into the development of it.
I think it's a great idea. I think you get a lot of input that way. You get you get more ears than just yours. Again, it's like you said, when you build something, you create something, you're like you have that bias of yourself, and you're like, oh, I
Yeah,
made this thing. It's great. It's so good. Um, but getting the extra ears, getting people who you know don't have as much emotionally invested in something
sure.
is sometimes a great idea. It just comes down to getting the sound samples, distributing them up, because obviously you can't distribute the samples over YouTube because YouTube's audio is awful.
Yeah, that's a struggle.
Y- yeah, it's bad. Guys, I know as someone who is starting again to demo things on YouTube, things don't sound on YouTube like they do in your house. Just warning y'all. Just y'all know this. Um, but I think that's a great idea to do. It reminds me of, and I'm trying to remember. There was a guitar builder that did a community feedback guitar build, and I can't remember what it was. And I'm real scared that I'm remembering somebody who's now ostracized from the community. You know what I mean? Like I'm referencing someone who's been like canceled, and so I can't remember who it is, but they did something like that.
Is there any chance it's Driftwood guitars? I listen to that channel. His acoustic builder, and then he built like
It could have been Driftwood.
He built an electric for Rhett Scholl, and switched from acoustic to electric and whatnot. And
Yeah,
so
it might have been them, and if it's them, that's awesome. They are not
Yeah.
ostracized. They're good people.
But
I cannot remember off the top of my head. I did want to mention before we move on too far, we've referenced this a couple of times, and I've sort of taken it for granted that everybody knows what a figure eight is. So,
sure.
for you YouTube viewers, you can see here's my cell phone, and a figure eight microphone is a microphone that picks up on both sides of the face of it, but not on the sides, just on here. It's not omnidirectional. And so if you look at the pattern, it looks, oh, can I do this? It looks like a figure eight of what it picks up.
Mm-hmm.
So just so I don't want to assume anybody knows things. I've gotten in a lot of trouble for assuming people know things.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's really good because I mean, and I came up through all of this, learning it whatever
yeah,
way I could, and figure eight mics made no sense to me when I was younger because I thought that if you used a figure eight mic, that you literally had to be in a recording situation where you like wanted to record a figure eight shaped audio source, like a group of people over here and a group of people over here. Like, why? That's weird. Like, why would you? And so,
why would you ever do that?
yeah, so like so figure eight's this weird pattern, and the thing is, you just most of the time you use one side. You're recording a guitar amp. It just happens to be that the nature of a ribbon mic is naturally suited to figure eight, so it's just kind of a nature of
Right.
the physics of it. But yeah, it doesn't. You don't need to use it for a figure eight. The other useful thing is that they say what they call the null point. So the part that isn't picking up sound
Right.
rejects really well. So the sides of a figure eight mic are quieter than the back of like a cardioid mic. They're even quieter.
Oh, that's intense.
Yeah, so they have really good rejection at the sides. And so if you're ever in a situation where you've got like something really loud coming from a direction, you can point the side of a ribbon or a figure eight towards that thing, and that really helps with like separation and stuff.
Which is probably why they are such a popular microphone for mid-side configuration.
Yeah, because they're only picking up the sides and not the front. And yeah, go ahead. You can explain mid-side if you want.
Yeah, you get a truer stereo image from it because it's so with mid-side listeners and see if I can do this correctly. Mid-side is a 2 microphone setup. Oh, well, at minimum a 2 microphone setup in which you have a microphone facing the sound source and another aligned so that it's rejecting the sound source but picking up in a figure eight from the sides, basically acting as a room microphone. And engineers use it to produce a stereo image of a sound. And that's the super simplified version of it. It's really popular in miking good sounding rooms when you really want to get that sound of the room in your recording. Or in it was really, really popular for, this is when I used it the most, for when I was in school for audio engineering. Our role as engineers, we would go to all of the music department, which I was a dual major in music and audio engineering, so I did this a lot. We would go to the recitals and we would have to record all the recitals, and we did a lot of mid-side configuration for those recitals to get the recital hall and the performer.
Nice. Yeah.
So anyway, I digress. I wanted to explain that. Yeah, I get in trouble occasionally. I get in trouble both ways for over explaining. People think I assume they don't know things, and then people get mad at me when I don't explain it, and they get mad because they assumed I assumed they knew things.
Yeah.
Like I can't win here.
I get it.
So I'm just going to explain things.
That's what the internet does. Like, you can't win always, but I think it really is good to explain because here I am, a ribbon mic guy. Like, hey, I build these ribbon mics and whatnot, but hey, I'm not a pro engineer. Like, that's something I struggle with. Like, if I want to make a demo, I can't make a demo professionally myself as well as like a pro engineer would do with my mics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I came up all through this trying to learn it by hook or by crook as best as I could, and I was the guy who didn't understand the podcast many times, so like I think that's great.
Yeah. I for me it's the at this point my audio engineering knowledge is digressed because I don't use it every day. Doing the podcast I use it more, but mine becomes an issue of I have my limited space. I have this room which is just a spare bedroom in my house. My wife graciously has allotted me 2 spare bedrooms because I have this room and then I have another room that has like cases and some speaker cabinets and some other stuff that's not being used, and so this is not a great sounding room. One,
sure.
So I'm limited there. I can't crank as loud as I'd like to for things to actually get to that like really. My favorite amp's a super reverb, and a super reverb. I don't care what y'all say. Excuse me. I'm drinking a diet soda, and therefore I had to burp away from the microphone. See, that's the inside baseball you audio listeners don't get by not watching the videos on YouTube. You can see it there. But what happens is with a super reverb, yeah, they sound good at 3. They don't sound bad.
Yeah.
But they don't sound any better than a Hot Rod Deluxe.
Sure. Yep.
You know, they don't sound any better than any other amp at 3. Now, if you get that super reverb to 6.5 or 7, that thing is the voice of God. It's just there is no other amp that sounds better. I loved hearing an interview with Derek Trucks, and he talked about his super reverb and his love of the super reverb. He said, "Yeah, but you got to get it to like 7." And it was interesting that he had the same experience I had, and though he did say, although there's been some times where I've probably pushed it to 10, probably shouldn't have, but I did. But so I don't have the space here to do that. But you know,
which is just
I
tragic because, you know, with those amps. So like I said, when I was younger, I was way more, you know, down the guitar rabbit hole, and I was on the vintage amp thing. And I remember I worked like all summer, my junior year of high school, and I'm like, I'm going to get myself a vintage amp. And I made this pilgrimage to Dave's Guitar Shop in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin, but it's a real nice big guitar store. And I had scoped out a 1975 twin reverb, 100 watts, 2x12. And I'm
peel
like,
the paint off the walls.
I'm putting this in my bedroom, you know. And so I spent a good number of years learning how to perfectly dial from 2 1/4 to 2 3/8, which was a large, you know, difference there.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with that battle.
Yeah, there's that jump in the super somewhere between 2.5 and 3, where it's a whisper.
Yep.
And then it is an outright scream.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh. And so there's no in between. So it's still my favorite amp. There's nothing that replaces it. But yeah.
Have you tried an attenuator on it?
So the hard part about an attenuator on a super reverb is that it's 2.1 ohms.
Oh,
is the output on a super reverb.
Okay, yeah.
So I do have. I'm gonna shill for a product real quick. I have this specifically because I use a Captor X. It's behind me over here.
Okay.
To do recording because again the pre-spoken of limitations of my space. Well, this is a Weber Z Matcher.
Okay.
And this is a passive device. It's hefty because it's got a massive transformer in it. May have a couple. But it will take any input ohm from your amp from 2, 2.6, 4, 5.3, 8, or 16, and it can output to a different ohm, to a different resistance.
Nice. Okay.
Or a different impedance. And so it can take your 2.1 ohm amp and it can output 8 ohms into my Captor X.
Nice.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Or I could take it and run it into an attenuator.
Yep.
It's also got a line out straight out of it.
Nice. Well, for that super, that sounds like the right piece of gear.
It is, except here's the problem. If I want to run it back into the speakers of the super reverb, I need another attenuator, another Z matcher to take the now 8 ohm signal that has gone into the attenuator to match it back to the 2.1 ohms that the speakers are expecting to see. And I only have one of these.
Yeah.
So
that would be a hilarious setup. If you had Z matcher and then like an attenuator, another Z matcher, that'd be hilarious.
I told you I'm Captain Inconvenient here. So, this is a great product though. If for those of you that love a super reverb and you want to be able to use it with a Captor X or a aux box or the tube amp expander by Boss, you need one of these. They're not terribly expensive. I don't know what they are now. I bought it from Weber. They build to order. Like, there's not stock on their website, so just email them. There's almost never stock on their website. I want to say it was like $130. Like, it's not an expensive piece of gear. It's totally worth it.
That probably makes sense.
It's heavy.
I mean, it's probably just all transformers in there. That's been a big.
I'm pretty sure that's all it is.
Yeah, that's been a big learning trail for me, because to do the microphones, that's another thing that I did, is that I did not want to buy an off-the-shelf transformer. So I learned to wind and design transformers in the process of doing ribbon mic. So I make all the transformers myself.
That was going to be my next one. You make all your own transformers.
Yeah, and the ribbon mic transformers are super high ratio, and like the amount of design that needs to go into making a good one is tough. And it was a whole thing. Like, I don't know if you want to hear about it, but the core that you make the wrap the windings around has to be a very specific material. Took me forever to figure that out. And when I was building them myself, I didn't have a winder, and I do toroidal. You know, there's a better way to do it. It's a donut shape. Well, I was winding them by hand, so I would take, like, 100 foot of wire, wrap it around a credit card, piece of a credit card, and then pass 300 turns of wire around this little donut. That's how I built, like, my first 10 microphones. And then I looked up a winder, and I got a used one, and I drove out to some, like, super sketchy, like, a used equipment place in Ohio, like, after work one night at 7 p.m. and they didn't even know what they had. They like, we don't know how it works. We don't know what it is, Oh
my God.
But I got a great deal on a toroidal transformer winder that, lucky for me, did actually work after some tweaking. But that
oh, well, that's good.
That was a learning adventure, I'll tell you.
Hey, well, it's interesting. So transformers are like this whole other world to me. So I listen to a podcast. You may listen to it as well. Do you listen to The Truth About Vintage Amps?
I just started recently, actually. I just listened to that for the first time like 2 days ago.
Okay. Well, did you listen? Which episode did you listen to? The most recent one?
No, I did not. I went back and
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you to go forward to. So they just released this week, as we're recording, episode 103.
Okay.
Go to episode 102. It's literally an entire episode on transformer winding.
Oh, that's my game right there. All right,
like,
no problem.
Yeah, they had a guy. I feel really bad. I can't remember his name right now, but he owns a transformer company. He builds and winds transformers. He'll do rewinds too, although often he tells people it is not worth it to rewind this transformer.
Sure.
You just need a new transformer. But yeah, he goes. I listened to it while doing yard work.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like total tech nerd ASMR. Like, I didn't ingest most of the tech speak that he was saying because I did not understand it. But you seem like the kind of person that would understand the things he is saying.
Oh yeah, I'd be right into that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was a wild experience. A lot of eyes glazing over. For me, even Skip was like, "This is way in the weeds for me."
Sure.
So it's but I'm glad there are people out there.
I'll say though, on the tech side, like, as somebody that now, like, I've gotten pretty confident in my tech game. I actually did. I've gotten really deep into impedance and stuff like that, and I actually did like an 18-minute, I guess you can call it a lecture on impedance on my YouTube channel, just because I wanted to, because
oh wow,
because it was a topic I've never seen covered well, and I made the video like, I wish I had this video at 18 years old when I couldn't figure out what Bill Lawrence was saying, and so anyway, I made that video. I'm confident in, like, a lot of my tech knowledge, always learning more, but now being on a more confident side of that, there's a lot of product design that is essentially guess and check. I mean, you do all the science, you learn as much as you can. Well, then you go build stuff, and you listen to it. I mean, it's 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. You know, it's Thomas Edison stuff.
Right.
And I really think that the product design, the beauty of product design, is both of those things married together. Like, learn as much tech as you can, but there's some of this stuff that is not entirely explainable. Like, I cannot tell you why I selected the number of winds I did on my transform. I can tell you the ratio, but like the inductance that I chose, it sounds different. And it's really hard to actually break that down. I just picked the one that sounded good, you know? And so it's like,
Right.
sometimes us tech guys can make you think that we know more than we do, because really behind it, we just tried a bunch of stuff and picked the best one. So
Yeah, I've got some listeners of this podcast who are sure that they can they know who they are. They they know exactly who they are. They are sure that they can design mathematically all of the circuits. And I'm just like, yeah, you can, but then sometimes you've got to take that thing that looked mathematically perfect and go in and say, okay, it's so perfect it doesn't sound good. Now I need to make it imperfect.
yeah.
Why does this sound better? I don't know. Mathematically, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And
But it does.
it's a good strategy too. Like, I think some of the best products are all happy accidents, you know. I think a lot of classic things that got popular in guitars and amps and recording are things that people stumbled on. I mean, what's the
Sure.
story about the first rock and roll song and Ike Turner, and they broke down on the side of the road? I mean, these are where these brilliant things happen.
Yeah.
And so
Ike Turner's amp
yeah.
fell out of the back of the car,
Yeah.
and they put it back. When they put it back together, it distorted. It's funny because I'm from Clarksdale. You've listened to the
Yep.
podcast. You've heard me mention that. I've met Jackie Brinston, who sang Rocket 88.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, no, he was like a regular fixture in Clarksdale, where I'm from. I've actually played with Ike Turner's son. Um, he's a piano player. I think he lives in Oklahoma now, but he would come play the blues festival that I play every year.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, needed a guitar player for a gig. I was around. I was the guy who ended up playing. You know, it's real fun. But it's those accidents. It's those things. Look at the concept of distortion entirely. Just period. It was never meant to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a design flaw.
Unintentional effect of tubes in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and yet here it is. That's the thing we're all trying to get.
Yeah.
Unless we're playing like hardcore straight ahead jazz.
Yeah.
And getting that classic no distortion sound. Even then, y'all please go back and listen to Charlie Christian and Wes Montgomery. In some of those cooking tunes, some of the live stuff, they're getting distortion. It's not in your face like we think of it, but there's definitely some upper harmonic thing going on in the way they attack the strings and really start to dig in. I find it super fascinating. I love the tech side of it, but I don't like getting super techie. It's weird. It's a terrible way to look at it. I just like hearing about it and hearing how it influenced things, and then hear the stories of the way people used it later. Like, that's why I think we love the stories of Leo Fender and Ted McCarty and Seth Lover. It's why we love the stories of the way they developed stuff, even if we don't care about the science of why it works.
Yeah, you know,
we just love the tinkerer.
Oh yeah, and I think there's something specifically attractive about music gear. I mean, there's a reason that everybody's been talking about their gas, and we all have this thing going on with acquisition of gear, and I think part of it is that, like, stuff that makes music, it's honestly just a really cool part of life, because music is imperfect. And so there's the music itself, but then there's like using all these items to make music, you know, like when the tubes distort and it did the unexpected thing, and then we found kind of beauty in that, is, I think, just inherently fascinating and kind of attractive. And it's all over the place. It doesn't matter if you're talking about, you know, guitar amps, or I'm actually like, always tinkering and stuff like that. So currently I'm doing something a little crazy. I'm trying to build an acoustic guitar. For the first time.
Oh,
my wife knows me so well. For my birthday, this is like the best birthday present ever. She said, you know, here's your birthday present. It's the phone number of a local luthier that has lessons and a budget. Go build an acoustic guitar. I was like,
that's awesome.
It's a great present, you know? So I've been doing that over here. Yeah, just like, I've been loving it. And so now, like, I wouldn't have gotten into it unless she kind of edged me over the edge. But now I've been
Yeah.
listening to all these acoustic design guys. Like I said, Driftwood Guitars is a nice channel, and
Yeah,
and
yeah, they
that's
are.
fascinating. Like the history of the radius of the top and the tuck braces, and like I got deep into wood selection and all that stuff. And it's not because I need the perfect acoustic guitar sound and I just am really snobby about acoustic guitar sound. It's because it's so cool to learn that
Yeah.
this guy selected like this very specific cut of spruce from this 3,000-year-old tree, and then like it caused that sound. Like that's just fun. Like it's a great thing
It's just
to. Yeah,
interesting.
exactly. Yeah, it's very attractive. Like, and so everybody feels kind of bad about our gear addiction, but I'm like, that's a beautiful part of life. It's a beautiful thing to get to learn about.
I see. That's the reason I like microphones, and like because to me microphones are witchcraft.
They're a
Like
little bit
there's
witchcraft.
wait, you're gonna use pieces of metal, magnets, and crystals to take sounds and reproduce them somewhere else. That is witchcraft. It's like the very concept of so here I'm in Starkville, Mississippi. Most of my listeners know that. If you don't, we have Mississippi State University is here on here in Starkville, uh, and in the library of Mississippi State University they have the Templeton Victrola collection, and it's this incredible assortment of old school, and I don't remember. I'm gonna blanket call them all Victrolas. They're not all Victrola company. They're not all exactly that thing. Some of them are wax cylinders. Some of them are shellacked plates. Some of them are metal plate. They read metal plates to reproduce sound. So I'm using a blanket term, but it is watching these devices work in a completely acoustic way.
Mm.
You literally wind them up. They use spring energy and a needle bouncing in a groove through a conical speaker that is there's no power whatsoever, and it's reproducing sound is the eeriest and strangest and coolest thing ever. And I think that's how we feel about most just producing music in general.
Yeah.
It's magic.
Well, a lot of the mics and recording and all it is amazing that it works. Like we
Yeah,
discovered that it works. It's like somebody figured this out, and it's like it's not it's a natural phenomenon that we happen upon. It's not like nobody made it happen. It's and so
right.
I'm amazed that it does work as well as it
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
It's just it's and we find and finding the joy in that, finding the joy in the gear. That's just a fascinating thing to me. And actually, I'll leave. We'll close with this just because we want to get over into the Patreon episode. Hey, Patreon supporters, thank you for your support. We're going to have some extra content for you. If you're not a Patreon supporter, please go to patreon.com/40watt podcast. Okay, look at that, slipping that commercial in there. It'll be just my luck. That'll be where my hosting service also puts a commercial. Um, but uh, I just listened to Corey Wong's podcast with Chris Thiele,
Oh, okay.
and I highly recommend it. They had one of the most joyful conversations
Hmm.
about just music and making music and just that excitement and that allure of playing with other musicians and being in the room, and they didn't get like way down the technical rabbit hole, which both of them could.
Yeah.
Both of them could get real technical about the music they create because both of them make very technical music in their own way, but they never did. They talked about the interaction of people and the joy and that magic of creating music in a room. And there was a point where they were talking about uh, different types of music festivals where it's a thing now with these mega festivals where they have stages that are way too close to each other and way too loud.
Hmm.
And Chris was talking about how he said, I'm an acoustic guy, and there's like we all gather around one microphone, and it's everybody playing off of each other
Yeah.
and interacting with each other as this ensemble acting as a single musical instrument, and it's that same joy. And some people get it in the gear, some people get it in the music, some people get it in the performing of the music, some people get it in all of it. But I like what you said. It's like shouldn't feel bad about being excited about the gear because it is exciting. It's interesting, and there's I don't know. There's a magic to it. I'm just going to keep using that term
Yeah.
until Disney comes after me.
It's rewarding. It's
there's
rewarding to learn.
it is very rewarding.
It's just very satisfying. It's a great interest to have. Yeah.
It's super cool, and we are living in the best time to be into it.
Yeah.
It was the best of times. It's the worst of times too. If you're on a budget, it's the worst of times because there's a lot. There's so much. But we'll talk about that another time. Tyler, it's been great having you on, man. It's been good to get this to happen.
Thank you so much for having me. I just enjoy chatting. So thanks for hanging out.
Absolutely. Well, listeners, I want to take a moment to thank all of my Patreon supporters by name. You guys are rad. I totally appreciate your support. Tyler, I'll apologize for one of these, but on this episode with you, at the $10 level, which is the high wattage, y'all. I'm real cheesy with the name of these levels, I promise. High wattage level got Ben Fair, got Dan Pilver of Lewitt Audio, got Heath Batt. At the $5, which is the medium wattage level, again, I'm real creative with these ranking levels. Got Andy Koning. I've got David Ishizaka of the Timber Owls, Giacomo Ride. I've got Jeffrey Walks, Jim Burns, Kyle Harris, Rick Calhoun of Honey Picks, Scott Hamilton of the Effects Loop podcast, and Tom Kelly. Thank you all for your support. You literally make this continue to happen and make it so that I can keep paying for Adobe where I process all this stuff. I appreciate it. Until next time, y'all remember to be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and make some noise.